So after 3 years of using the Klymit Static V, do I still recommend them for beginners? In this video, I'm going to be telling you what I think after 3 years of use. Well, it's hard to believe that it's been 3 years since we both got our sleeping pads. These were our first sleeping pads when we went backpacking for the first time.
They were, and we both have very different opinions on them. I am not a huge fan.
Whereas I would still recommend these for beginners for multiple reasons. We'll get into that later. But let's talk a little bit about the pads themselves.
Yeah.
Now, I've upgraded to the insulated sleeping pad because, as everybody knows, I'm a cold sleeper.
Mine is not insulated because I actually sleep very warm. Mine only weighs 18.1 ounces.
Whereas the insulated comes in at about 24 ounces. But both of these are still really budget options for beginners.
Mine is only $55, and you can also buy it on Amazon.
Whereas the traditional insulated Klymit you can get for $76. They have more upgraded versions that are even lightweight and are a little bit more pricey, but still a really good bargain.
The material for both mats is 75D ripstop nylon, so they are pretty durable. I've never had any issues with mine deflating or ripping.
An interesting thing is that the features of the blow valves have changed. I think we both agree, because I used to have the traditional Klymit, that's not a good blow valve.
Yeah, this one doesn't have a backstop, so as you're blowing on it, especially when it gets to the full stage, the air rushes out, so it's you have to close it really quickly to get the air to stay in.
Whereas this one's a push and pull valve and twisting, and it works pretty well, but sometimes it gets really stuck and it's really hard to pull out. I've even had people reach out and ask me how to make this thing work, so it's a little finicky. I don't know if they fixed that since I bought this one, but not a great thing. Anyways, let's get into the details of the pad itself a little bit more and why I think it's still a good option for you. So like I said, I would still recommend the Klymit Static V sleeping pads for beginners for a number of different reasons. Now, I gotta admit, I've tested a fair amount of different sleeping pads, I think 5 or 6 over the past 3 years, and this isn't my favorite sleeping pad, but I still think it's a good option if you're just getting started. Now, in Tyler's video where he talks about this sleeping pad and why he doesn't recommend it, you can check that video out at the end of this video. He addressed the fact that it has these side baffles that Klymit touts is supposed to hold you in the center of the sleeping pad. I have to agree with him. That does not work. I've definitely rolled off this sleeping pad countless times. They don't really work. I've already mentioned a little bit about the valve, and the valve I'm not crazy about, but it still does its job decently. Now, as to some of the things that I do like about it, I actually find the unique V shape quite interesting. And there's a lot of sleeping pads that are just a solid form when if you lay on your sides, if the baffles aren't designed well, you can just sink right down to the ground. And this definitely helps to do that while saving weight and making the pad a lot easier to inflate. Now, for some people, that's not a problem. I've never had an issue inflating basically any of my pads, and I can inflate this one in about 11 breaths. And they say it takes about 11 to 15. The issue with a pad that's thicker without these kind of V-shaped baffles is it takes a lot more air. By the time you can be pretty winded, especially if you're in high altitude and you're not used to that. The biggest reason I think that this is a great beginner sleeping pad is because of the budget. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how expensive sleeping pads are, especially when you just get started. I know when I was looking at sleeping pads for the first time, I wasn't even sure if backpacking was going to be something I do on a regular basis. And so the idea of dropping $150, $100 or whatever on a sleeping pad seemed outrageous. That's why I actually bought the original Klymit Static V. It was on sale. I think I got it for $50 Canadian, so it was probably like $30 American. But regularly it goes for that $55 price range. I quickly realized that it wasn't warm enough. The regular Klymit Static Vs have an R value of 1.3. Now that's the old model of R values. This one has an R value of 4.4. Also the old style of R values. But as a cold sleeper, that difference made all the difference. There's a pretty hefty penalty to pay of the difference between 18 to 24 ounces. But for me, that warmth was worth it. And I won't lie, this isn't the most comfortable sleeping pad I've ever had, but I have found it to be fairly comfortable. It's 2.5 inches thick, which is more than enough cushion to keep you off the ground and honestly keeps you sleeping pretty good. I am a side sleeper, and yes, sometimes when I'm tossing and turning and getting into that position, I can feel the ground a little bit beneath me. But once I level out and I'm in my position, this really does lift me up off the ground. Personally, Tyler's had issues with the ground underneath him. I haven't, but maybe that's a little bit of a difference of expectation as well. I didn't start backpacking expecting to be getting like the best sleeps in the backcountry ever, and so they've always been decent, so I've always been happy. Now, I know that's saying a lot about these pads, and ultimately, you're gonna have to make the decision for yourself. People don't realize that when you're just getting started, buying your first gear is really overwhelming. That's why I recommend the Klymit Static V as a good option.
No, don't do it.
Well, obviously, Tyler has a few different opinions. You can check out his video in the card right here on the side.
A lot of cons.
Well, it's not that bad.